if women are behaving more like men in society in all sorts of ways to do with education and the workforce and so on, then it behoves men to behave more like women.
Yeah.
Some cultures find this extremely difficult.
We'll put that in a trail. China's population has fallen for the first time since 1961. The birth rate has been declining for years, but the country has now entered an era of negative population growth, sparking fears over the negative impact this could have on its economy. So for today's urgent question, we're asking, what does China's population drop mean for the rest of the world? David Coleman is an emeritus professor of demography at the University of Oxford, and he joins us now. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
It's a very big question, this one. How might this impact the rest of the world?
It is a big question, and I deserve a Nobel Prize if I could give a thorough answer to it. But I think the answer is actually rather less than you might think. This downturn in population size has been long forecast. The new thing is only that it's happened rather sooner, a decade or so sooner than most forecasts suppose. That's partly, I think, because we didn't really exactly know what the Chinese birth rate was, it being something of a state secret and covered in a bit of confusion. It's something which most demographers think is need not mean a big change in China's economic power. And it's the economic power of China which I think lies at the basis of your question. That is this going to change in some damaging way, which will damage the world economy as a consequence of this? And I think the answer is certainly in the short to medium-ish term, no.
OK. In general, though, does negative population growth mean that an economy downturns as well? And why exactly would that be?
Conventionally, yes, it does imply that, because it means that other things being equal, that the workforce will be lower. The balance in the economy between those who consume and those who produce will become worse as the old age population grows in relation to the working population. This is all fairly common sense stuff, but it need not be, because there are two or three countervailing factors which may more than reverse that adverse expectation. One is that education increases, particularly in countries like China, which is still developing, such that each cohort is better educated than the next one. And that means that the human capital and productivity is likely to increase substantially as the population, even as the population ages. The second is that the population entering old age is likely to be, certainly ought to be, healthier with each successive year than it was in the past, and therefore able to work for longer and take as natural a later age of retirement, which is something that wise governments encourage throughout the world, and foolish governments try to oppose.
It's been 7 years since China scrapped the one-child policy. So does that mean that what we're seeing now might change direction again once that change in the control of people's family, the control of their fertility, is really no longer in play?
We can't be certain about that. A recent learned paper has suggested there are two possible scenarios for China's fertility. One is continued decline down to the extraordinarily low levels of South Korea, which is equivalent to a family size of 0.81 children. Or it might follow the pattern ordained for it by the United Nations, which is to increase the birth rate to equivalent to 1.7 children, which would be much more like the sort of level which economists are happier about. It's difficult to tell which, but in my view, something in the middle is likely to happen, because I think the Chinese population has got used to the idea of having a small family size, of leaving behind the notion of the importance of family connections, which of course are much more fewer and far between with a small birth rate than they are with an ordinary birth rate. And there are certain major advantages in having just one child from the point of view of the human capital you can give it, its educational prospects are much greater. Its employment prospects are much greater. Its prospects for advancing itself in the world are much greater. These get a bit risky when you get down to a tiny birth rate because of the dependency, which you mentioned earlier on. But I think low birth rates are here to stay. Population decline is not something to be feared, but in fact, in the medium term, to be looked for, because without a stabilization of world population, of which, of course, China is a big chunk, then we're heading for real trouble with population climate change.
Professor, what about the problem that China had with more baby boys being born, considerably more baby boys being born than baby girls, because female fetuses were being aborted? That must have, implications for Chinese society.
It certainly does, and it's been widely commented on for many years now because it's been a chronic problem. I think there was a calculation of 30 or 40 million surplus men, and surplus men, as we all know, cause problems, especially if they're young. This is something which is readily resolvable by sensible social policies and political action. After all, it is, as you pointed out, completely artificial, and arises out of the influence on personal behaviour of various expectations about differences in sex roles. And if education and modernisation of attitudes can remove those prejudices, as they have been doing in China, then I think that the problem will dissipate in due course. I don't see that, I hope I'm not being too optimistic, as a major difficulty.
But
Although it
until
will cause problems for the time being.
Yes, exactly. Until that situation is rectified, which will be,
Yes.
I mean, forgive my ignorance, will be by trying to tell people that it isn't just male children who will bear the responsibility for parents. Is that the so-called traditional thinking?
That is traditional thinking, and it's all part of a general welcome trend for men and women to be treated equally and to regard each other equally from the point of view of their capacities and responsibilities, and particularly establishing a proper role for men to take a proper share in all the burdens of family life and childcare. Because if women are behaving more like men in society in all sorts of ways to do with education and the workforce and so on, then it behoves men to behave more like women. Some cultures find this extremely difficult.
We'll put that in a trail. Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Really interesting stuff. David Coleman is Professor of Demography at the University of Oxford.